There is something profoundly powerful about a super empath who has awakened to their worth. You have spent so much of your life understanding others. You feel deeply, you anticipate needs. You sense shifts in tone, in energy, in emotion before a word is even spoken. And for a long time, you believed your power was in how much you could give, how much you could love, how much you could hold space. But here is the truth. Your greatest power has never been in your overextension. It has always been in your radiance. And radiance is not neediness in disguise. Radiance is not chasing reassurance. Radiance is not proving your value to someone who is emotionally unavailable. Radiance is the quiet, grounded certainty that says, I know who I am, I know what I bring, and I do not shrink to be chosen. When you deal with an avoidant personality, it can feel like a painful dance. The closer you move, the further they retreat. The more warmth you offer, the more guarded they become. And if you are not anchored in self-worth, you begin to interpret their distance as a verdict on your value. But their distance is not a measure of your worth. It is a mirror of their fear. Avoidant behavior is often rooted in self-protection. It is not about your insufficiency. It is about their discomfort with vulnerability. And when you understand this, something shifts. You stop internalizing what was never yours to carry. Here is where most super empaths lose themselves. They try to love harder to close the gap. They try to communicate better, give more space, be more understanding, be less demanding, be more chill. They twist themselves into emotional origami, hoping to become safe enough to keep someone from leaving, but pursuit fuels avoidance. When you chase, you confirm their subconscious belief that closeness equals pressure. When you overfunction, you allow them to underfunction, and the dynamic becomes imbalanced. It is not coldness, it is self-possession. When you step back, not in bitterness, but in dignity, you shift the energy entirely. You are no longer trying to fix, convince, or prove. You are observing, you are discerning, you are deciding. That is power. A super empath rooted in self-worth does not abandon their softness. They refine it. They learn that boundaries are not walls, they are gates. And gates open for those who walk through with intention and respect. When someone pulls away, you do not panic. You do not scramble. You return to yourself. You pour into your purpose. You reconnect with your friends. You nourish your body. You invest in your growth. You deepen your spiritual grounding. You remember that your life is expansive, not dependent on one person's emotional availability. And here is the paradox. When you stop orbiting them, you become the sun. Radiance attracts, chasing repels. When you embody self-worth, your energy changes. There is less urgency, less fear, less silent bargaining. You are no longer saying, please choose me. You are saying, I am choosing what chooses me. That energy is magnetic because it is scarce. It is rare to meet someone who feels deeply yet does not lose themselves, who loves fully yet does not cling, who offers warmth yet requires reciprocity. And if an avoidant cannot meet you there, then your radiance becomes your compass, not your cage. You begin to see clearly. You no longer romanticize potential over reality. You no longer confuse intensity with intimacy. You no longer accept breadcrumbs and call it a feast. Self-worth gives you vision. It allows you to ask, is this connection nourishing me? Is this person capable of meeting the depth I bring? Or am I trying to earn love that should be freely given? The divine principle here is alignment. You cannot force someone into emotional readiness. You cannot love someone into healing. You cannot sacrifice yourself into security. But you can honor yourself into peace. And peace is powerful. When you stand in your worth, you do not fear distance, because distance reveals truth. It shows you who leans in and who leans out. It clarifies effort. It exposes capacity. And clarity is freedom. The super empath's radiance is not loud. It does not beg. It does not perform. It is steady. It is grounded. It is luminous because it is sourced from within. You become less concerned with managing someone else's fears and more committed to honoring your own standards. You say, without words, I am open. I am warm. I am here. but I will not abandon myself to stay connected to you. That is the moment the dynamic changes. Either they rise to meet your steadiness, or they drift away. And if they drift away, you do not collapse, because you finally understand this. Rejection from someone incapable of depth is protection for someone who is. Your radiance was never meant to be dimmed by someone else's shadows. It was meant to illuminate your path toward relationships that are mutual, courageous, and emotionally available. So stop negotiating your worth. Stop translating their distance into your deficiency. Stop chasing clarity from someone who benefits from your confusion. Stand still. Root yourself in truth. Let your energy speak before your words do. And remember, the super empath who knows their worth is unstoppable, not because they force connection, but because they no longer fear losing what cannot honor their light. Self-worth is the super empath's true power, not emotional overgiving. For so long, you may have believed that your strength lived in how much you could tolerate, how much you could understand, how much you could forgive. You took pride in being the safe place, the calm presence, the one who could hold emotional weight without dropping it. And while empathy is a gift, it becomes self-abandonment the moment it is used to secure love rather than express it. Emotional overgiving often disguises itself as virtue. It feels noble, it feels generous, it even feels spiritually aligned. But if we look closely, overgiving is frequently driven by fear, the fear of being misunderstood, replaced, or left behind. It whispers, if I just love a little harder, they won't leave. And that whisper slowly turns into exhaustion. True self-worth does not need to prove itself through sacrifice. It does not equate struggle with depth. It does not believe that love must be earned through endurance. Self-worth understands a simple but life-altering truth. Love given freely should also be received freely. When you operate from low self-worth, empathy becomes a transaction. You listen more than you are heard. You compromise more than you are met halfway. You soothe others while silently hoping someone will notice your unspoken needs. Over time, resentment builds, not because you are unkind, but because you are unkind, but because you are depleted. But when you operate from high self-worth, empathy becomes a choice rather than a compulsion. You give because you want to, not because you fear losing someone if you don't. You care deeply, but you no longer chase validation through service. Your kindness has boundaries. Your generosity has discernment. There is a powerful shift that happens when a super empath recognizes that their value is inherent, not conditional. You stop asking, what more can I do to make them stay? And start asking, is this connection aligned with who I am becoming? That question alone transforms your relationships. Overgiving places the other person at the center. Self-worth places you back at the center of your own life. It does not make you selfish, it makes you stable. And stability is far more attractive than desperation masked as devotion. You see, when you overgive, you unintentionally teach others that your energy is unlimited. You teach them that your time is flexible, your standards negotiable, and your needs secondary. Not because they are malicious, but because you never required more. Self-worth changes that dynamic. It says, I am loving, but I am not limitless. And that distinction commands respect. There is also a deeper, almost divine principle at play here. You cannot pour from a place of emptiness and expect to remain whole. When your giving is not anchored in self-honor, it becomes self-erasure. And love that requires you to erase yourself is not love. It is attachment dressed as sacrifice. The super empath's real power is emotional intelligence guided by self-respect. It is the ability to understand someone's wounds without making them your responsibility to heal. It is offering compassion without forfeiting standards. It is recognizing red flags without explaining them away. When you stand in self-worth, you become less reactive. You no longer scramble to fix tension or fill silence. You allow space. You observe behavior. You trust patterns over promises. Your energy becomes calm rather than anxious, grounded rather than grasping. And here is the paradox. When you stop overgiving, you often receive more. Why? Because healthy people respond to healthy boundaries. They lean toward what feels solid. They invest where they feel mutual effort. When you no longer overextend, you create room for reciprocity. Self-worth also frees you from the illusion that your empathy can transform someone who is not ready. You begin to understand that your role is not to rescue, but to relate, not to save, but to share, not to convince someone of your value, but to embody it so clearly that it is undeniable. You are still warm. You are still compassionate. You are still deeply intuitive. But now your empathy is anchored. It flows from fullness rather than fear, and that is where your true power has always been. Not in how much you can give away, but in how deeply you can honor yourself while giving. Radiance comes from emotional self-sufficiency, not validation from others. That distinction changes everything. Because for many super empaths, the habit has been to look outward for reassurance that they are valued, desired, and safe. When someone is warm, you feel secure. When they are distant, your nervous system flares. Their attention becomes the thermostat for your emotional climate. And without realizing it, you hand over your inner stability to someone else, ease shifting moods. Emotional self-sufficiency is not detachment. It is not coldness. It is not pretending you don't care. It is the grounded ability to care deeply without collapsing when someone else pulls back. It is knowing that your worth does not fluctuate based on response time, tone of voice, or the frequency of affection. When you rely on validation to feel secure, you become hyper-attuned to external signals. You analyze texts, you reread conversations, you look for hidden meanings in pauses. You measure your value by their enthusiasm. This creates a fragile form of confidence, one that rises and falls with someone else's behavior, but radiance is stable. Radiance is internally generated. It comes from knowing who you are independent of, who is approving of you in the moment. There is a powerful calm that emerges when you stop chasing reassurance. Instead of thinking, why haven't they called? You think, I trust that what is aligned will flow naturally. Instead of trying to extract certainty from someone who is unsure, you root yourself in your own clarity. Emotional self-sufficiency means you can sit in silence without assuming abandonment. You can witness distance without immediately personalizing it. You can allow space without rushing to close it. That steadiness is magnetic because it communicates abundance rather than scarcity. When validation is your fuel, you overextend to maintain connection. You agree when you want to disagree. You stay available when you need rest. You tolerate inconsistency because you fear losing attention. Validation becomes addictive because it temporarily soothes insecurity. But like any external source of worth, it requires constant replenishment. And the more you need it, the more power you give away. Self-sufficiency changes the equation. You begin to validate yourself first. You acknowledge your efforts. You honor your growth. You recognize your beauty, your depth, your contribution. You stop waiting for someone else to confirm what you already know to be true. Of course you do, but it becomes a bonus, not a necessity. Compliments feel good, but they are not required for stability. Affection feels nourishing, but its absence does not dismantle you. There is also a deeper spiritual principle here. When you source your worth from within, you align with something unshakable. You move from reaction to intention. You stop trying to control outcomes because you trust your capacity to handle whatever unfolds. An avoidance distance, for example, loses its power when you are emotionally self-sufficient. Their withdrawal no longer dictates your self-perception. You don't scramble to win them back or shrink yourself to reduce pressure. You remain steady. You observe. You decide whether their behavior aligns with your standards. Radiance is born in that steadiness. Radiance is born in that steadiness. It is the glow of someone who knows they will be okay, with or without a particular person. It is the quiet confidence of someone who chooses connection but does not depend on it for identity. It is warmth without neediness, openness without desperation. And ironically, this is often when dynamics shift, because when someone senses that you are not clinging, not demanding, not anxiously pursuing, they feel less pressure. Space becomes breathable rather than suffocating. Your calm disrupts their defense. But the real transformation is not about changing them. It is about freeing yourself. When you are emotionally self-sufficient, you no longer fear loss in the same way. You understand that what leaves creates space for what is better aligned. You begin to approach relationships from desire rather than deficiency. You want connection, but you do not need it to survive. You enjoy closeness, but you do not collapse in its absence. That is radiance. It is the light of someone who has stopped outsourcing their value. It is the strength of someone who feels deeply yet stands independently. It is the peace of knowing that your emotional world is anchored within you, not in the unpredictable hands of someone else. An avoidance distance is a reflection of their fear, not your inadequacy. But if you are a super empath, that truth can be incredibly hard to accept, because when someone pulls away, your instinct is not to blame them. It is to examine yourself. You replay conversations. You wonder if you were too much, too emotional, too available, too honest. You search for the flaw in your delivery rather than recognizing the wound in their defense. Distance feels personal, silence feels intentional, withdrawal feels like rejection. And when you care deeply, it is natural to want to fix whatever caused the shift. But here is the deeper reality. Avoidant behavior is rarely about the other person's shortcomings. It is about the avoidant's discomfort with vulnerability, dependency, and emotional exposure. Closeness activates fear in someone who equates intimacy with loss of control. The more real it becomes, the more their nervous system signals danger, not because you are dangerous, but because emotional reliance feels unfamiliar, even threatening to them. When you internalize their distance, you carry a burden that was never yours. You assume their retreat is evidence that you lacked something essential. You interpret their hesitation as proof that you were not captivating enough, not secure enough, not worthy enough. But that interpretation is rooted in self-doubt, not truth. And avoidance distancing strategies, pulling back communication, becoming vague about feelings, prioritizing independence over connection, or coping mechanisms. They are protective habits formed long before you entered the picture. They are shields built to prevent vulnerability from becoming overwhelming. Understanding this does not excuse unhealthy behavior, but it does liberate you from unnecessary self-blame. When you recognize that their withdrawal is a pattern, not a verdict, something shifts internally. You stop scrambling to repair what was never broken in you. You stop editing your personality to reduce their discomfort. You stop trying to become smaller so they can feel safer. Because here is the truth. No amount of perfection can calm someone who is afraid of intimacy. You could be endlessly patient, flawlessly communicative, effortlessly attractive, and still trigger their fear once emotional depth increases. This is where self-worth becomes essential. Instead of asking, "What did I do wrong?" you begin asking, "Is this person capable of meeting me at the depth I naturally bring?" That question redirects the focus from self-criticism to discernment. Super empaths often believe that if they just love gently enough, wisely enough, strategically enough, they can create safety for the avoidant. And while your presence may indeed feel safe, you cannot override someone's internal wiring. You cannot heal wounds they are unwilling to face. When someone distances, your power is not in pursuit, it is in observation. Notice whether the pattern is consistent. Notice whether accountability exists. Notice whether effort returns once space is given. Patterns reveal capacity far more accurately than promises. It is also important to understand that avoidant individuals often value connection deeply. Their distance is not proof of indifference. It is proof of inner conflict. They may want closeness, yet feel suffocated by it. They may crave love, yet resist reliance. That push-pull dynamic can be confusing, but it is not a measure of your desirability. If anything, strong connection can intensify avoidance because it raises the emotional stakes. The deeper the bond, the greater the perceived risk. When you detach their behavior from your identity, you reclaim emotional clarity. You see their actions as information rather than indictment. You allow their distance to reveal who they are instead of redefining who you are. And this perspective is freeing. Because when you stop personalizing their fear, You stop chasing reassurance. You stop over-functioning to stabilize something, unstabilize something. You stand grounded in the understanding that someone else's avoidance is about their relationship with vulnerability, not your relationship with worth. You remain open, but not desperate. Compassionate, but not self-sacrificing. Understanding, but not self-blaming. Their distance may still sting, but it no longer dismantles you. It no longer rewrites your value. It becomes simply what it is, a reflection of their capacity at this moment in time. And that clarity allows you to respond from strength instead of insecurity. Pursuit feeds avoidance. Grounded presence disrupts it. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in emotionally imbalanced relationships. When someone pulls away, the instinct, especially for a super empath, is to move closer, to check in, to clarify, to reassure, to fix. Your heart says, if there is distance, I must bridge it. But what feels like loving effort can unintentionally intensify the very pattern that is hurting you. Avoidant behavior thrives on pressure, not necessarily loud, dramatic pressure, but emotional expectation. The more they sense that someone needs something from them, reassurance, consistency, emotional depth, the more their nervous system interprets closeness as demand, and demand to an avoidant feels like loss of freedom. So when they take a step back, and you respond by stepping forward, the dynamic tightens. You pursue, they retreat. You explain, they withdraw. You offer more vulnerability, they shut down. It becomes a loop, and the more anxious the energy, the stronger their impulse to create space. This is not about blame, it is about energy. Pursuit often carries urgency beneath it. Even when your words are calm, the subtext may say, please don't disappear. Please reassure me. Please choose this. That subtle anxiety can feel overwhelming to someone who already struggles with emotional closeness. Grounded presence is different. It does not chase. It does not demand. It does not collapse into silence either. It stands steady. When you are grounded, you allow space without dramatizing it. You resist the urge to overtext, overexplain, or overanalyze. You maintain your rhythm. You continue living your life fully. You do not withdraw affection as punishment, but you also do not increase it as persuasion. There is immense power in that steadiness. Grounded presence communicates security. It says, I value connection, but I am not destabilized by temporary distance. That message shifts the emotional tone of the dynamic. Instead of feeling pursued, the avoidant feels less pressure. Instead of bracing for expectation, they sense calm. And calm is disarming. When you pursue, you unintentionally confirm their subconscious belief that closeness equals overwhelm. When you remain grounded, you challenge that belief. You show that intimacy can exist without control, without engulfment, without urgency. But this requires inner work. Because grounded presence is not a strategy, it is a state of being. If you are silently panicking while pretending to be calm, the energy still leaks through. True groundedness comes from self-trust, from knowing that if someone pulls away, you will be okay, from believing that you deserve reciprocity and do not need to convince anyone to offer it. You must regulate yourself before you can regulate the dynamic. This means sitting with discomfort rather than reacting immediately to it. It means noticing the impulse to reach out and asking, am I connecting from wholeness or from fear? It means allowing someone the dignity of their own process without trying to manage it. Ironically, when you stop chasing, you become more intriguing. Scarcity creates curiosity. When your attention is not constantly available, it gains value. When your energy is self-contained, it becomes magnetic. But again, this is not about manipulation. It is about alignment. You are not withholding to gain control. You are stabilizing so you do not lose yourself. Grounded presence also reveals truth faster. If you step back and the other person steps forward, you see willingness. If you step back and they drift further away, you see limitation. Either way, you gain clarity without sacrificing dignity. Pursuit clouds judgment. It keeps you focused on maintaining connection rather than evaluating it. Grounded presence clears the fog. It allows you to observe patterns without trying to immediately correct them. And there is something profoundly attractive about someone who does not panic, someone who can hold silence without spiraling, someone who trusts that what is meant for them will not require constant chasing. When you embody that energy, the dynamic shifts from anxious attachment to calm polarity. You are no longer reacting to their distance. You are responding from stability. In that space, either they feel safe enough to lean in, or you realize they are not capable of meeting you. Both outcomes serve you, because the moment you stop feeding avoidance with pursuit, you begin feeding your own strength with composure. And composure rooted in self-worth changes everything. Boundaries are acts of love, not rejection. For a super empath, this can feel counterintuitive. You have built your identity around understanding, accommodating, and giving space for complexity. You pride yourself on being patient, on being the one who doesn't give up easily. So when the idea of boundaries arises, it can feel harsh, almost like you are withdrawing love instead of expressing it. But boundaries are not walls built to punish someone. They are structures built to protect connection from resentment. Without boundaries, love becomes unbalanced. One person overextends, the other underinvests. One person absorbs emotional labor, the other avoids accountability. Over time, what began as compassion slowly turns into quiet frustration, and unspoken frustration erodes intimacy far more than clear limits ever could. A boundary says, I care about this connection enough to require it to be healthy. It is not an ultimatum. It is not control. It is clarity. When you allow inconsistent behavior without addressing it, you send a message, often unintentionally, that it is acceptable. When you tolerate emotional unavailability without consequence, you teach someone that your needs are optional, not because they intend to dismiss you, but because you have not required alignment. Boundaries recalibrate that imbalance. They communicate self-respect, and self-respect invites respect from others. For example, if someone frequently disappears for days without explanation, a boundary is not angrily accusing them. It is calmly expressing, consistency matters to me. If communication drops off without clarity, it doesn't feel aligned for me. Notice the difference. You are not attacking their character. You are stating your standard. Healthy people respond to that with awareness. Unhealthy people respond with defensiveness. Either way, you gain information. Super empaths often fear that setting boundaries will push someone away. But what truly pushes people away is hidden resentment and emotional exhaustion. When you suppress your needs to keep peace, you create internal chaos. You may appear calm externally, but internally you feel unseen. Love cannot thrive where one person is shrinking. There is also a profound spiritual principle in boundaries. You teach others how to treat you by what you tolerate. If you tolerate dismissiveness, you normalize it. If you tolerate disrespect, you reinforce it. But when you calmly refuse to participate in dynamics that diminish you, you elevate the entire interaction. Boundaries are not about controlling someone else's behavior. They are about controlling your participation. You cannot force someone to communicate better. You cannot demand emotional availability, but you can decide what you will and will not engage with. That decision is empowering because it shifts you from reaction to intention. And here is the paradox. Boundaries actually create safety for both people. For you, they prevent burnout. They protect your emotional well-being. They ensure that your giving remains generous rather than resentful. For the other person, boundaries remove confusion. They clarify expectations. They eliminate guesswork. Instead of wondering what is acceptable, they understand the standard clearly. Avoidant individuals, in particular, often operate better with defined space. When boundaries are calm and consistent, they reduce pressure. Instead of emotional intensity, there is structure. Instead of unpredictability, there is clarity. Boundaries also reinforce your own self-worth. Every time you honor your limit, you send a message to yourself. My needs matter. That internal reinforcement strengthens confidence. You stop seeking permission to require reciprocity. It is important to remember that boundaries do not require hostility. They are most powerful when delivered with steadiness. No raised voice, no dramatic ultimatum. just calm certainty. I value this connection, but I also value myself. That energy is transformative. If someone walks away because you expressed a healthy need, they were benefiting from your silence. And losing someone who required your self-abandonment is not a loss. It is protection. Boundaries filter. They reveal who is willing to grow and who is only willing to take. For the super empath, learning this can feel like stepping into unfamiliar territory. But once you experience the peace that comes from self-honor, you realize boundaries do not reduce love, they refine it. They ensure that what remains is mutual, respectful, and sustainable. And that is not rejection. That is devotion to something real. Detachment rooted in self-respect restores polarity and attraction. This is not the cold detachment of indifference. It is not pretending you don't care. It is not playing games to provoke a reaction. It is the quiet decision to emotionally step back from overinvestment when reciprocity is inconsistent. For a super empath, this can feel unnatural at first. Your instinct is connection. Your reflex is closeness. When something feels uncertain, you lean in to stabilize it. But when you are the only one leaning, the dynamic tilts. Attraction fades when energy is uneven. Polarity collapses when one person overfunctions and the other underfunctions. Detachment restores balance. When you detach from the outcome, whether they text back quickly, whether they define the relationship, whether they choose you, you reclaim your emotional center. You are no longer gripping the connection so tightly that it becomes strained. You allow it to breathe. Attraction thrives in space, not pressure. If someone senses that your happiness hinges entirely on their behavior, it creates unconscious weight. They feel responsible for regulating your emotions. That responsibility can feel overwhelming, especially to someone avoidant. But when you detach from needing a specific response, you lighten the emotional atmosphere. Detachment says, I desire this connection, but I do not depend on it for my identity. That energy is powerful because it communicates abundance. It signals that you have a full life, meaningful priorities, and internal stability beyond this one dynamic. You are choosing the connection, not clinging to it. Polarity is often misunderstood as mystery or distance, but at its core, polarity is about energetic contrast. When both people are chasing, tension dissolves. When one person is anxiously pursuing and the other is retreating, the imbalance creates friction rather than magnetism. Detachment rooted in self-respect shifts that imbalance. You stop over-initiating, you stop over-explaining, you stop trying to control the narrative. Instead, you observe whether effort is reciprocated. This does two things. First, it restores your dignity. Second, it gives the other person room to step forward. If they care, they will feel the shift. They will notice your steadiness. They will sense the absence of pressure and may naturally lean in. If they do not lean in, their inaction becomes clarity. Either way, you win. True detachment is not emotional shutdown. You remain warm, you remain open, you simply refuse to chase. You trust that mutual interest reveals itself without force. There is also a deep psychological principle at play. People value what they invest in. If you are always available, always initiating, always solving, the other person has little opportunity to contribute. Over time, their investment shrinks because it is not required. When you detach, you create opportunity for them to invest. You create space for pursuit. You restore the natural rhythm of give and take. Self-respect is the foundation of this detachment. Without self-respect, detachment becomes a tactic. With self-respect, it becomes alignment. You are not stepping back to manipulate. You are stepping back because you recognize your worth. You understand that effort should not be begged for. You believe that love should flow, not be negotiated. This shift changes how you feel internally as well. Anxiety decreases, overthinking softens. You stop obsessing over timelines and outcomes. You begin to enjoy your life again instead of monitoring theirs. And here is the irony. When you become less fixated, you become more attractive. Confidence is compelling. Emotional independence is magnetic. Someone who chooses you freely is far more captivating than someone who needs you desperately. Detachment also protects you from over-romanticizing potential. When you are too attached, you see what could be rather than what is. When you detach, you evaluate behavior clearly. You notice consistency. You measure effort. You assess alignment without distortion. If the connection deepens, it does so organically. If it fades, it does so without destroying your peace. Detachment rooted in self-respect is not about losing interest. It is about losing fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. When fear loosens its grip, your energy shifts from anxious to grounded, from reactive to composed. And in that composure, attraction either strengthens or reveals its limits. Both outcomes move you closer to something balanced, mutual, and real. When you stop chasing clarity from them, you become the clarity. So often in emotionally uncertain dynamics, you are waiting for a label, waiting for reassurance, waiting for them to define what this is, where it's going, how they feel. You analyze mixed signals and hope that one day they will sit down, look you in the eyes, and finally say something definitive enough to quiet your doubts. But the longer you wait for someone else to provide clarity, the longer you remain suspended in ambiguity. Chasing clarity often looks like repeated conversations about where we stand. It sounds like, I just need to know what you're thinking. It feels like trying to extract certainty from someone who is unsure within themselves. And while communication is healthy, there is a difference between expressing wants with confidence and repeatedly seeking reassurance because their actions are inconsistent. When someone's words and actions don't align, the confusion you feel is not a mystery to solve. It is information. If they say they care but rarely show up, that inconsistencies is clarity. If they claim they want something serious but avoid deeper conversations, that avoidance is clarity. If they disappear when things become emotionally intimate, that pattern is clarity. The problem is not lack of data. The problem is hoping for a different conclusion. As a super empath, you tend to give the benefit of the doubt. You look at their potential. You understand their fears. You interpret their inconsistency through a compassionate lens. But compassion without discernment keeps you in limbo. Clarity is not something you beg for. It is something you decide from what you observe. When you stop chasing explanations and start honoring patterns, your energy changes. You no longer ask, why are they like this? You ask, does this behavior align with what I want? That subtle shift moves you from confusion to authority. You become the clarity by embodying your standard. Instead of dining a definition, you define your availability. Instead of pleading for consistency, you require it. Instead of waiting for them to choose you, you choose yourself in real time. There is immense power in saying, calmly and without hostility, I'm looking for something consistent and emotionally present. If that's not where you are, I understand, but that's what I'm aligned with. Notice there is no accusation, no drama, just grounded self-knowledge. Clarity is attractive because it removes chaos. When you are clear about your standards, you stop sending mixed signals, you stop tolerating half effort while asking for full commitment. Your actions and your words align, and alignment commands respect. When you no longer chase clarity, you also free yourself from endless overthinking. You stop dissecting text messages. You stop looking for hidden meanings. You stop assuming that confusion is romantic tension. You recognize that healthy connection feels steady, not uncertain. This doesn't mean you demand perfection. It means you require congruence. There is also a spiritual maturity in this shift. You begin to trust that what is meant for you will not require you to abandon your intuition. If something feels confusing for too long, that confusion is guidance. It is directing you back to yourself. By becoming the clarity, you remove the emotional tug of war. If they are ready, they will rise to meet your standard. If they are not, they will fall away. Either outcome brings peace because you are no longer suspended in doubt. Clarity is not always comfortable. It may mean walking away from potential. It may mean accepting that someone cannot meet you where you stand. But temporary discomfort is far less painful than prolonged ambiguity. When you stop chasing clarity, you stop chasing control. You release the illusion that one more conversation will transform inconsistency into commitment. You accept reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. And in that acceptance, something powerful happens. You feel lighter, stronger, more grounded, because now, instead of waiting for someone else to define the connection, you are defining your life, your standards, your boundaries, your direction. You are no longer asking, what are we? You are saying, through your actions, this is who I am, this is what I require, and I move accordingly. That is clarity embodied. Thank you for sharing your time and energy here. May these words strengthen your self-worth and remind you of your quiet power. Goodbye for now, and may you walk forward grounded, radiant, and deeply aligned with what you truly deserve.